Hi, this is Chris again with RoboSprout. Just here showing a expansion board we have for the smoothie board V2, which plugs in. It's just a PWM board basically. It's kind of necessary if you're hooking up a laser most of the time. If you're using like a K40 that uses an opto output, the PWM pins just aren't strong enough for source or sink to be able to drive the opto pin. So that was the purpose of initially making this board. Since a couple of the headers have 4 PWM outs, I made a board with 4 PWM connectors that have transistors on them, so they actually drive the PWM a little bit more buffered, and they can drive more power. You could drive, say, a solenoid, or an opto, or hobby servo, things like that. If you were running a hobby servo, you can also cut this jumper here, JP2, and run the power in off of this header. So say if you were running 4 hobby servos and you wanted to run them at 6 volts and you didn't want that voltage to interfere with your digital system at all, you could just cut that jumper and run your own input, and all the 4 of these, the high side will be based off of this input as opposed to being based off the 5 volt that comes in on the Gadgeteer header. Now, also on here, I added a couple of things since we had some spare pins. This is the comparator input here. This is the same comparator input that's on the V2 smoothie board. It is what's on the probe input on the V2 smoothie board, and it allows use between 3 and 48 volts, depending on jumper setting on your input. So you can pretty much use any sensor or trigger on it, a switch and BL touch, or a inductive probe, or whatever you want to put on there, just depending on your jumper setting. And it will always trigger at exactly the trigger point, so it's very precise and repeatable. So it actually increases your repeatability of your probe quite a bit, from my testing at least. So then here we have 2 switch inputs, which are just like your standard end stops on a V1 smoothie board. They're just normal switches. You could use them for door switches on a laser or whatever you wanted. So I found that this little board, since it just plugs into one header and uses them all, gives you the 4 PWM, and then the extra switch inputs. It'd probably be useful to anybody who's doing some sort of laser mod or K40 mod. Now, using the button box setup, I have it plugged into SmooPi here, and so basically, if I trigger this comparator input, I get comparator triggered. Now when I release, you get comparator released. So same with the button inputs. When I press them, button up 1, button 2, down and up. So if you're using the button box feature in the config on this V2 smoothie board, you can actually send commands on button press or button release. You can have it just work on press, just on release. It's very versatile for different types of inputs. I'm using it for the wrong way for a couple of things right now to hack a pick and place, so it's pretty neat. But if you were, say, running a laser off of this and you wanted that PWM to drive, here we have a macro for laser fire, which does 50% for 5 seconds. So when you press it, it'll say right here, firing laser, and you see the LED goes on, 50% PWM for 5 seconds. Now, if you were hooking, like I said, if you're using a K40 laser, you pretty much need this type of level shifter or some sort of level shifter in order to drive the opto. It cannot be driven really off of the 3.3 volts that this microcontroller puts out, and the current that this microcontroller is able to sync is not enough to be reliable for the optocoupler to turn on based on the defaults that are internal inside the machines. And I'm sure that's the same across a lot of machines, not just the K40 laser. I suspect anything with those normal opto isolated laser modules is going to have that same problem.